Hey guys, thanks for tuning in. The EA series is back, and Steve Wolfson has joined me today to talk about Pluto from evolutionary astrology point of view. Thanks, Steve, for joining once again. And we already did a very good establishment as a part of introduction to this series that we are doing. And again, thanks for coming.
Oh, you're very welcome.
So I think we'll directly jump into the Pluto stuff, which is probably one of the most important aspects from EA point of view.
Pluto is the Pluto is the basis of astrology and of human life from the evolutionary astrology perspective. I want to start with a disclaimer in that I practiced Jeffrey Wolf Green evolutionary astrology for a long time, many years. And, in reviewing the Pluto material to give this talk, I realized the places where my perspectives have gone a different route over time. So I first want to honor Jeffrey Wolf Green and all I have learned from him. And at the same time, I have evolved, which is in directions that are right for me. And so my perspective diverges somewhat from the traditional Pluto evolutionary astrology view. The core of it is the same, but my take or spin on the whole thing has changed. And so in other words, for anybody listening to this wanting to learn what is evolutionary astrology, some of what you're going to be hearing from me is not from the book, so to speak, Evolutionary Astrology, but it's very much based on the principles that are in Jeffrey's books. But my take on things has evolved for myself. So the gist of it is that evolutionary astrology looks at things from the perspective that we are all souls that have incarnated into human bodies. And, in the traditional sense, we have karma, we have lifetimes, we have what appear to be choices, and we grow, we evolve. One of the places where my take has changed is not only in evolutionary astrology, but in spirituality in general. Looking at karma, the concept of karma and the concept of reincarnation, somewhat of the perspective that somehow I have done something wrong, which has resulted in my life being the way it is versus the way I really, really wish it would be. Because most people I know, if they had their preferences, would like to have a life where they're very creative, they have all the money they need, they have wonderful people in their life, there's not a lot of stress, and they're just, we're happy as much of the time as possible. And yes, people die, etc. People get sick, but other than that, I just kind of want this really nice life. And very few people seem to actually be having that kind of life. And so one of the ways of interpreting that is that, well, we've all really messed up, because if we were really worthy, we'd be having the kind of life that we wish we were having. Because some people seem to have it. To me, digressing for a moment, that seems to be what celebrity culture is about. That people become famous and everybody loves them. but it is very interesting how many of the celebrities in their actual personal life do not seem to be all that happy when you really get down to it.
Yeah.
So the issue is, well, then, I mean, for me, it comes down to, then why is everything the way it is? And having distilling everything that I've been through in the last 5 years or so down is, what if everything that we're having that I or we wish was different than the way it is actually exactly the way it's supposed to be? And it's not my fault. I haven't done anything wrong. It's just for reasons that I don't yet consciously understand, this is what needs to be. And a lot of it isn't fun, and at times, and I can wish, I don't have to like it, and I can wish it were some other way. But what if it is the way that it's supposed to be, and it's not because I or anyone has done anything wrong?
Yeah.
This is what I have come to, where it differentiates from the way that I learned evolutionary astrology. And another place is, what I have been learning is, from the perspective of the soul, everything that we go through makes total sense. We don't operate in general from the perspective of the soul. We have all developed ego personality, and we operate from that. So my current orientation is, what if all of the difficult and painful things, as well as the wonderful things that we experience, are all actually intended to wake us up out of feeling as separate individual egos and personalities, and leading us towards a remembrance of our soul identity, our actual identity. And that the things that occur are lessons along the way. And that we're not stupid, and we're not, intentionally messing up. So that's my background to where I'm going with this. In evolutionary astrology, Pluto is Scorpio, 8th house is all essentially the same. We're talking here about the planet Pluto. What I'm talking about applies to Scorpio and 8th house. Pluto operates in the EA, Pluto directly correlates to the soul. Jeffrey has postulated this, that the soul has a dual desire nature, that one part of the soul wants to go home, so to speak, wants to wake up, and one part of the soul desires to not wake up, to be floating around having the kind of experiences we're having. As we humans do, where we're trying out this, that, and the other thing because we think it's going to make us happy, and it makes us happy for a little while, and then we're bored with it, or it turns out to be painful or whatever, and we're off to next, what's next? And that whole process is Pluto, symbolized by Pluto.
So the actual transformation from both inner and external level.
Yes, because Pluto is the soul. Pluto is the soul itself. So if we look at the cause of our being here in a human body, is our soul. Now, our souls themselves are separate from, in other words, there is one source of everything that created everything. And for reasons we can't comprehend at this level, that source broke itself into trillions of little pieces, and that experience themselves as separate from each other. And we know that in reality, we're all one and it's all the same and all this. But let's just say the screenwriter, the script writer, has done such an amazing job that all of these pieces firmly believe that they are separate from each other, and to the degree that they're willing to kill each other, rob from each other, to try to advance themselves. And and to some extent, even those of us that are more consciously aware that, oh, we're all one, we still have a hard time translating that into consistent behavior and awareness and consciousness.
Okay.
This is so wonderfully done. To me, it cannot be an accident.
I mean,
in other words,
the kind of explanation that you gave leads me to think that human beings are basically just the physical instruments or physical form of the actual soul. That is what is the conceptual belief in India as well. So
yes,
Vedic astrology has a similar belief that soul is omnipresent, while as you said, human beings are just kind of physical instruments that is being released by a soul to have an eternal or a spiritual experience, as it is. So, but still, each and everything is directly related.
I'm sorry, I just lost you.
Now,
Yes,
okay.
back.
So, yeah. So, uh, the soul is kind of omnipresent, and as humans, we are just uh, soul kind of releases the physical form in terms of a human, and we are experiencing a spiritual experience on earth, and each and every experience that we have is actually a human experience and not necessarily the soul's experience, because soul kind of stays forever but a human form doesn't. So is that where we are arriving at? um, is that where we are arriving at basically?
Well, that's a basis of it, and that has been the prevailing view. Now, this is, again, out beyond evolutionary astrology, but what I'm coming to see is we're at a point, in other words, there's a subtle judgment on human life in that perspective, that somehow it's less than the soul, or something we have to struggle through in order to get back to awareness that we actually are the soul.
I mean, the human consciousness.
So what? Yes. So what if we're absolutely supposed to be here, expressing as we are? Because I agree about it being a vehicle for the soul to work through, but what if it's a vehicle of creative expression?
For sure.
That this soul wants to animate and bring into this world, and that each one of us is a unique expression of that infinite, and we are here to bring forth our unique perspective, each one of us.
Great.
So that's a starting place as I am looking at things these days. I'll add to that my feeling is that rather than us, the traditional sense is, if I meditate long enough and sincerely enough, I'm finally going to get out of here. And the new perspective is not that we have to get out of here to connect with our soul, but that our souls are actually descending into the human consciousness, into the earth, so that we will be experiencing ourselves from the perspective of soul while still in the body. So we're simultaneously living out in human form, and yet we're being more consciously aware of the soul being the driving force behind it. because most people feel, you know, I'm a personality that has a soul. But in reality, and not just as a mental concept, I am the soul. And so expanded awareness is operating in both of those levels of consciousness simultaneously at the same time. I am living a human life, and at the same time, I am a soul that is beyond the human life, and I'm aware of both of them. And so my moving around every day, doing what I'm doing, is actually carrying out what the soul wants. I align what I do with what the soul is asking me to do. Instead of me having to be in control, in charge, trying to control, feeling insecure, worrying about this, that, and the other thing. Now, Pluto manifests as a generational signature. And we don't really have time to get into all of them, but at the time that the first Pluto book was written, which I should add was in the 1980s, which is now quite a while ago. And so everything has evolved since that time. At that time, this was very revolutionary, and it's still evolutionary. A generational signature, for example, of the soul. At the time that evolutionary astrology started coming out, the Pluto and Leo generation were the young people, and that was my generation. And so we were finding our way. So the essence of the Pluto and Leo generation, where Leo is about creative expression. And so this was a generation that was not just going to sit back and take it. They were going to let you know about what they needed and what they wanted and how wonderful they were. And this was not a bad thing. There was like an impulse or need in that generation for the souls that were coming in at that time to find this creative expression. I would say this aligned to the planetary need, the need of the planet itself at that time to evolve. It needed people that were going to activate this principle. And so souls that were aligned to that overall need say, okay, it's my time. I'm getting into a body. Pluto changes signs, of course, in my life. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We've had 6 signs so far, and we're getting close to Aquarius, the 7th. And each of those generations is bringing a different way of looking at life based on the nature of the Pluto signature they're coming in with. Might be good to talk for the moment about Pluto and Scorpio, because we're talking about Pluto. So Pluto and Scorpio people, this is a very intense generation. And they're coming of age at a time when the world is going into a great state of transformation. We are using up our physical resources. We have more people than we've ever been possible to have. These are going to lead to various crises in the way that we're living that are going to require radical changes to survive. All those are Pluto kind of themes. And we have a generation coming up that's going to be right in the thick of all of that at its core is Scorpio, that has the desire and the capacity to go through change and survive it. Couple of the terms that Jeffrey used to use about Pluto are osmosis, which means that because it's a water sign, Scorpio, water sign, the way that it works, one of the ways that it works is when it gets interested in something to tend to form a relationship to it, whether it's a person, perhaps it's an interest in evolutionary astrology or history or music or whatever. And it's to get really intensely involved with it. And through that relationship, whether it's with a person or a thing or even a, like history, a concept, through that close relationship, it brings into itself the essence of whatever it is it's bonding with, and it evolves through that process. That's osmosis. He also used the term metamorphosis, and that's basically cocoon, caterpillar, cocoon, butterfly. Looking at a caterpillar, there's not a lot of, you would not see a caterpillar turning into a butterfly. It's just not like, how does this happen? And the process, the cocoon, is very much the Pluto Scorpio process. In other words, we're essentially taken down. I bring it up now because a lot of people are going through this now through the changes that are going on, and the energy changes that are going on in the world, where I can simply no longer go on doing what I have been doing. This can manifest as a loss of meaning, a loss of interest, and it can bring up a lot of emotions because, first of all, it's like, what am I doing wrong? Why is this happening? It can bring on depression. It can bring on withdrawal, not being clear on what am I supposed to be doing. And it typically brings on, when this process starts, I'm doing something wrong because I don't feel motivated to do much of anything. And in our culture, we give them antidepressants and send them back to work. And yet inside, there's a reason that they're going through these things. And this, to me, if you think of the caterpillar in the cocoon that's being taken apart, melting down, how does a caterpillar turn into a butterfly? It has to dissolve. And then it creates a new form. During the time that it's dissolving, it's not doing a lot. It's not crawling around on plants eating leaves. It's just kind of lying there going, what is happening to me? This is part of the Pluto process. And Pluto also represents the deepest emotional security patterns that we have. Now, these come from our past. So, in the perspective of the soul, they come from past lives. In other words, we gravitate to what we already know because we feel safe with what we already know. This goes on, a child gravitates to what it already knows. If it's we get conditioned in childhood. So when we grow up, we're attracted to people and situations that subconsciously remind us of what we knew as children. Because we feel safe there, even if it's a very dysfunctional situation, because we know that script, we know how to play that out, we're drawn to the same thing. This also goes back to past lifetimes, because ironically enough, we're attracted to because of the same principle, we're attracted to the same people, the same type of circumstances from life to life, because within the soul they're familiar. This is all unconscious.
At a deeper level, at a more deeper level, in a very intense manner, that we can feel at a subconscious level as well.
Disappointed?
No, that we can feel at a subconscious level.
Oh yes, that's what our past lives are in our subconscious, basically. Yeah. I find a good metaphor for how this works is like an iceberg out in the ocean. They say 10% of the iceberg is above the water and 90% of it is below the water. And that's like our conscious mind is 10% or 1% or whatever of what's actually in there. And yet I was just reading, Jeffrey said 75, 80% of our actions are unconscious. I mean, I think it might even be more than that. And because we're operating habitually, we live in bodies that have an inbuilt survival desire. We desire to remain in a body. There's an impulse in there that's keeping us alive. It's built into the body. It's not something we think about. It's what we call the fight or flight reaction. Our nervous systems, when threatened, go into certain modes. We either fight back, we run away, or we freeze. It's built in. This is an impulse that is, it's so automatic and it's so deep. And that to me are the changes that are going on now, because as we become more consciously aware of soul, it's like, oh, okay, because I have a time. We're all going to die. Pluto, we're all going to die at some point. And our bodies are built to resist the impulse to die because they want to keep going. And
okay, can you say that again, please? Our bodies are?
Our bodies, it's built into our bodies. It's part of our program. And it's like if we were a computer, part of booting up our body, it's like if the computer didn't want to be rebooted, it wanted to stay on all the time.
Ah, okay, cool.
So this is built in. And so everything that we do that is unconscious, that because it's familiar, is we're trying to stay feeling safe. We want to feel safe. And we feel safe with what we know. So in a very strange way, I mean, to use a really extreme example, if I grew up in a home and I was being beaten up regularly by a very angry father, part of my routine would be I might hate that father. I couldn't wait to get out of there. And I finally get out of there. But that whole process of life, of being beaten up and of hating the father, is so ingrained and so familiar that if people come along that actually love me and care about me, I'm afraid of that at first. I don't trust that. That's Scorpio. I don't trust that, because how do I know you're not just going to turn on me and start beating me again? Because that's what I'm conditioned to assume or expect is going to occur. Even if I know intellectually, mentally, these are wonderful people that would never do anything like this, that impulse is still going to come up. This, to me, is what we are healing. I'm not going to get into this because it's off the topic, but this, to me, is what we are beginning to learn how to heal within ourselves.
I mean, the feeling the transformation process and actually agreeing and accepting it as a part of the soul's journey.
Yes, but at the same time, not to make light of that. In other words, it feels terrible. The extreme example I just gave feels terrible. You know, we say, oh, love everything. Well, you're not going to love that. You're not going to love that. In 40 years, you might understand why you had to, or not to put a limit on it, but 10 or 20 or 40 years, you might begin to understand why you had to have that experience. Because See, the point of that in my example is, if a child is being beaten up like that, that child is, most of the time, is going to deeply imprint, there's something wrong with me. Why would this person be doing this to me if there wasn't something wrong with me? Even if consciously they knew that person's crazy, they're still going to imprint, there's something wrong with me. And that becomes the repeating pattern. This is how, to me, this is how we got into this whole thing of, I have all these crappy things in my life because of my bad karma, because I must have done all these things to other people. Because the underlying principle in there is I've done something wrong. So the new thought to me is, what if I've not done anything wrong? Even if, I mean, think about the father that was beating the kid up. When that father comes to his senses at some point, that father is going to be filled with, whether it's in this life, another life, what a crappy person I was. Oh my God. And yet there are things that happened in that father's life that led that father to be acting like that. Things, he experienced things that created that pattern, that anger, that inability to control self. So ultimately, it comes down to, at some point, us realizing, not that we're proud of everything we've done before. I mean, what I'm coming to a really good way of putting it is, with where I am now and what I know now, I would never do again. I would never do that again. To things that I may feel guilt or remorse about. And a person may accept my apology and may not be able to accept my apology, but even that is not really about me.
I mean, the profound realization.
Yes. As we're waking up, in other words, the more that I realize that I am worthy and I have felt unworthy in the past, in the present, and that much of what I have done, some of us take it out on other people and some of us take it out on ourselves. I'm not going to hurt anybody else, but boy, am I going to nail myself because I'm angry and I need an outlet for it. So I take it out on myself. That's not any better than taking it out on someone else. Well, it's a little better, but it needs to be healed nonetheless. So the way I would put it is, this is all part of the evolutionary path. At this time, I feel like our waking up, that we are souls and that we are worthy and that we have, what's a good way to put it? I have done, I'm an adult. I did things when I was a child, 8 years old, 10 years old, 14 years old. I wouldn't do them now. It doesn't mean that they were, great things to do then, but we're learning. We're learning.
Evolution.
Yes. We're learning. Everything we're doing is learning. So we're not wrong. And we have deeply ingested that we are wrong because that's the way we've been taught. It's an undercurrent in our philosophies and religions that we are where we are because of what we've done, and that equates to, since we don't want to be where we are, therefore what we did wasn't good. And it's just necessary. What I did when I was 8 and 10 and 14 and whatnot has helped get me to where I am now. It was an inherent part of me becoming who I am now. And so if I did things then mean, I don't feel like I did any terrible things, but if I did things then that I don't feel good about, I can make amends for that now. And that to me is part of evolution. In other words, we're here learning. We're just here learning, and it's not making other people wrong or making myself wrong. So let me see what time it is. So Pluto corresponds to our deepest emotional security patterns. And at certain points, we start feeling, it creates at certain points a sense of dissatisfaction. As I started speaking about that before. In other words, why do I evolve? There's an impulse in all of us that wants to evolve. I look at it, I've lived in the North Country, cold country most of my life. And, I learned in the springtime, trees start putting out leaves. There can be still snow on the ground. There's not leaves coming out. But that actually biologically, the sap, which is like the blood in a tree, it starts rising into the tree out of the ground 2 or 3 months before the leaves actually start appearing.
Oh.
This is an impulse. It's an impulse. There's something going on that creates like a tension or a dissatisfaction with the status quo. It makes me feel uncomfortable. I want to make the feeling go away. I want to keep going with what I have. But something enters the consciousness that says essentially, this is not enough. This is not enough. It's like if you're in, if you're in grade school and you're with your teenage friends and all this, and then you graduate, and then you're off to college. Well, that's a whole other experience. And then after some years in college, then you're off into the, quote, big world or real world. And it's a mixed experience. On the one hand, I feel like I don't know what I'm doing. On the other hand, I'm really tired of what I have been doing. And that's kind of the evolutionary imprint right there. It's like I can't do any longer what I have been doing because it's just not working for me anymore. This relationship is over, or this job is over, or I can't live at home anymore if I'm younger. And we just know inside. It's like this has gotten boring. I'm not learning anything here. Nothing new is occurring. And that's the impulse, because again, this goes back to the security principle. I feel safe with what I know how to do. When I start feeling like it's boring, I have to face the unknown. If I'm going to change what I do, then I'm going to change. That means I have to do things I don't know how to do.
And that is a very difficult process in itself.
Yes.
Which is very descriptive of transformation and in turn Pluto.
Yes. And so this is where astrology meets biology, as I would put it. Okay. In other words, astrology is symbolizing the processes that go on within being a human being. And the reason we stay with the same thing, now I'm not saying that anytime I feel dissatisfied, that means I should, get a divorce, move to the other side of the world. Because there's a certain amount of dissatisfaction that's inherent and supposed to be there in what we're doing. You work. So you work in a place, you don't feel totally connected with everyone, and there's some people there you really like and some people there you have a hard time with. And It's like it's supposed to be that way because the irritation that we experience is what actually is the driving edge of the evolution. This is why the idea, when I was saying before about we all want this, or most of us want this fantasy life where it's like 90% wonderful and 10% a little bit this and that. But the problem with that kind of life is you don't grow in that.
There's no transformational process that takes place in that kind of life. So
exactly,
it's just one path and just kind of without any ups and downs. It's a kind of very monotonous route.
Yes. And it's like in the uncomfortable feelings that arise is actually where our growth is. Now, this is pretty, I don't know about India, but in this country, United States, this is the opposite of what people want. Because we don't want the discomfort. We don't want the feelings that come with the jangly places. This is, relationship, partnership, intimate relationship, partnership relationship. This is one of the points to me of the close relationship because they bring up everything. And all of our, and that's a Pluto Scorpio archetype, by the way. In other words, we have our personas that we present to the world at large, and then we have the parts of ourselves that we don't like, that we try to take out of our public personas. And when we're intimately involved with somebody after a certain period of time, that's all coming out. And what we might call our shadow, our disowned parts that we're ashamed of, have guilt about, feel parts of us that people don't like. Maybe if I'm a happy person and I'm going around, everybody knows what a great, wonderful, happy person I am. That's not me. And in my secret life at home, I'm moving into stages where I don't feel so happy. I don't feel so up. I may not know how to handle that. I don't want people to see that because they see me as this guy that's always making everybody laugh and so forth. That's an example. So Pluto evolution is going to bring all of this out because the point of it to me is that we come to accept or realize that all of it is divine. All of it is divine because everything is divine. And that the evolution is about accepting that a human being is the way they are. And we're not, quote, perfect. We don't do everything by the textbook. We're not totally, it's funny, I've been listening recently to a man talking on YouTube, talking about how the people that are the nicest people, the ones that do everything for everybody, and are smiley and happy, that they're not really taking care of themselves, and they have a tendency to get sick later in life. Not every person, of course, but there's a correlation between not taking care of self. In other words, giving too much and not to self. And this actually not being healthy because we need to take care of ourselves. Now, I add to that, it's not the other extreme. It's not taking care of myself at the expense of other people by taking advantage of them.
It's a fine line.
Yeah.
The final.
we, yes, I mean, many of our cultures put forth the model or the ideal that just giving everything away all the time to everyone is the saintly way to be, and that so many people of good heart take that on as a model, and then they can look at self and judge places. Well, I'm so selfish about this, and I'm so selfish about that, and I didn't, offer the shirt off my back to that person that was on the street, but it was cold and I needed the shirt for myself. That makes me selfish. I mean, because we have imprinted a lot of this, and so the point I'm making is, we think we need to be a certain way, act certain ways, do certain things before I can consider myself worthy, and that's not the case. I am inherently worthy. Now here I'm talking about, spiritual people, conscientious people, and so forth. We do have narcissists among us who really are all about themselves, where what I'm talking about doesn't apply to them. That's like the other extreme. We have one extreme over here of I give myself away, and we have another extreme over here of I take everything for myself. And neither of those is healthy. That's my point. So anyway, some of the principles Jeffrey detailed Pluto in aspect to the nodes, because the nodes are very important in evolutionary astrology, as in Vedic astrology. The Pluto on the south node is what we call a relive condition. In other words, owing to the principle of familiarity that I have been talking about, Pluto on the south node is going to be being in a very familiar condition, because Pluto represents the desires of the soul, and the nodes represent how the soul has been acting those desires out in its human incarnations, lifetimes.
And the nodes in relation to Pluto, do you think is a specific topic that we can address? I mean, in a bit more detailed manner.
I think we should do another talk on that, because that's more involved.
Yeah, so I think that would be fair and reasonable enough to do Pluto with the nodes in kind of relationship with the nodes. So that will be a even more. I mean, it will be a perfect continuation and a profound one to this one.
Yes, we can. Yeah, let's do that.
Yeah.
So brief. Let's see. Yeah, we need to be winding down. Briefly, Jeffrey described 4 ways that Pluto operates. Very briefly, is it can create emotional shock or loss. That gets our attention. It can form relationship to something that's needed. I spoke about that a little bit before. To osmose from another. In other words, when I found evolutionary astrology, I was like, oh, this is what I've been looking for quite a while. And I became all about it. So I osmosed into myself the essence of evolutionary astrology. That's a good example of a thing versus a person. A Pluto kind of relationship with a person is going to be very intense. It is likely to be sexually intense, but not only sexually intense, but very intense. 2 Plutonian or Scorpionic kind of people, they want to get to the bottom line. I used to say it humorously like, well, I've known you 10 minutes and you haven't told me your entire life story yet. What's going on? A Pluto Scorpio person wants to get to the bottom line. They don't want to float around on the surface. Just because that's how they have learned, that's how you evolve, that's how I evolve, and they want to evolve. And at the same time, I want to mention in alignment with that, because of this intense nature, some of the important Plutonian Scorpio archetype or experiences are betrayal, abandonment, and violation of trust. And that is because a Scorpio Pluto person has experienced a lot of that. Thus, there are deep-seated insecurities and fears. So it's simultaneously wanting deep, intense relationship, and at the same time can have fear of the consequences of moving into that space, because of how often it can feel at times like having your heart ripped out. So I say with that in becoming less intense about it, in learning to be less intense about it, that's just part of the archetype. In other words, I have to be willing. I want to experience the pleasure and the beauty. I also need to be willing to experience the pain. I need to be willing to feel the pain. I need to be willing to feel ripped to shreds at times, because it is out of that ripping to shreds is kind of like the cocoon, and it's not fun. But out of that, the next me forms and reforms. It just takes away what has been, tears it away, and puts, and then gradually is put back together again. Well, I've learned from that. That's how we learn. Pluto can also help one become aware of new talents and capacities that have been in them that they weren't aware of. I believe he referred to the transit of Pluto over the sun in one of those, or Pluto-Sun conjunction natally, that new stuff is going to come forth that wants to be expressed.
The unexplored territories.
Yes, and that's an important phrase, because that's the essence of what's familiar versus what's unknown, which is the essence of what we call familiar, and also what we have called resistance. You're resisting your growth. I don't like that anymore. I've said it many times. I don't like that way of looking at it. I think I look at it now more like I'm further integrating all that's been going on here, and I'm not yet quite ready to make that move.
Okay.
Because when I'm ready, I will simply make the move. I mean, it could take 4 lifetimes. It could take 20 minutes. But it's another place I feel that we have unconsciously made judgmental. I feel like this term of you're resisting is, a really good example that just came to my mind is, I can take an 8-month-old baby and shake my finger in its face. You're resisting walking. You're resisting. And it's kind of like that. We demand of ourself and of other people that they walk before they're ready to walk, so to speak. So who am I to know what's gone on in your psyche or somebody else's psyche, what kind of wounds or fears or whatever that have been experienced, that person, well, I'm sorry, astrologers do this sometimes. Your next step is this. And then because of, it may not be the way the astrologer presents it, but the person may hear it as, well, I'm really afraid to do that, and so I'm going to put my mind to that, but they're not ready to do it. And then they create feeling bad about themselves, that they're resisting their evolution. I'm finding that actually detrimental. Although when it happens, everything is part of the evolutionary path. So if I ingested that message for 10 years, that I'm bad because I'm resisting, for some reason, I needed that experience. But the release from it is when something happens, the fourth way it works is situations that bring awareness of limitations that require and produce growth. So what if beating myself up is a limitation that requires change and growth? Right? I think it's that I need to go out there and write a book or whatever, but what if the limitation I need that I'm not writing a book is not that I'm lazy or afraid and I'm not writing a book, but that I'm putting on myself that I'm supposed to do something that maybe at some point I'm going to do, but it's not time for that yet. So in essence, I'm beating myself up about the future.
Kind of.
Right?
Yes.
And let's see, what else? So retrograde is another. We'll talk about this along with Pluto and
The nodes.
Retrograde, and some of the other archetypes.
Okay, sure. And maybe we can kind of figure out how and what we are going to do in terms of talking about the retrograde planets, because I think retrograde planets are kind of a separate phenomenon unto themselves. So we'll see how it goes. But I think your idea of Pluto with nodes and the retrograde is very good. So
let's do that, and maybe we can work in, because if I talk about Pluto retrograde, we can work in some of the general phenomena of retrogrades.
Sure.
We don't have to go into the specifics of each planet, but just of general, what is retrograde?
Okay, cool. So I think Pluto was really fun because as it is, from India, I don't have much of access to evolutionary astrology, and whatever you said is like close to what is the mythological and also religious belief as to, the context of Indian beliefs. But whatever you said is like, it's very easy to relate. At least from the belief system point of view, at least for Indians. So
yes. Oh yes, I understand.
Yeah, it was very profound, and thank you so much. We'll get back with Pluto retrograde and Pluto with nodes. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Aswin. Thank you.